Dynamite Kid and Mark Rollerball Rocco were two of the greatest wrestlers ever. These incredibly diverse workers were years ahead of their time, capable of being as technical, as rough, and as athletic as they needed to be. Rocco wasn't called the Mean Machine for nothing, but the fact that both had a real edge to their work elevated their matches together beyond mere technical contests, into fights for their life where neither would be bullied or allow a cheap shot to go unanswered. Joint Promotions presenting their matches as sport made it much easier for these two aggressive workers to build up their intensity throughout, lending a high-stakes feel to their encounters. Dynamite was famed for his explosiveness, while Rocco was famed for his stamina, which proved to be a great combination, as these two were able to have really fast-paced dynamic contests, where they changed styles and paces logically incredibly. Rocco took the nickname Rollerball after working as a stuntman on Norman Jewison's 1975 sci-fi action movie, where heartless corporations utilized an ultra-violent version of roller derby to quell individuality. Dynamite, of course, was famed for his huge bumps, but Rocco matched them, also taking impressive high backdrops, hard flip bumps into the corner, and dangerous bumps through the ropes. Both could seemingly do just about everything the other could, more or less as impressively. They had a wide variety of techniques to display, and the desire to pack as many into their match as they could. These were outstanding technical bouts that mixed activity and realism incredibly well. They took their grappling seriously in terms of effort and exertion, making it feel meaningful and important. When they were sort of playing by the rules, their matches were based upon erupting into several brief explosions. None of their holds lasted long because neither were ever complacent about their offense or defense. Starting with the typical surge to gain the first advantage out of the lockup, the wrestler who seized control was constantly adjusting positions and changing holds, trying to stay a step ahead to retain the advantage in the sequence, while the defender continually moved to try to alleviate the pressure and work their way into a counter or reversal, usually through a gymnastics series. When they were at their best, their whole match evolved out of this technical base, retaining the feeling of a struggle without obvious cooperation, while at the same time flowing in a very organic manner that allowed them to change things up believably when they wanted to. The key was that all their movement not only opened up more locks, but also allowed them to sneakily work in one or two compact, little dastardly cheap shots that were big because their unexpected opponent was prone. Their strikes were set up so well that they actually felt like they could potentially lead to a finish. Although these futuristic Dynamite vs. Rollerball matches contained a lot more glamorous high spots than the typical matches of their time period, they didn't feel like they were about the high spots because everything was done with an equal amount of effort and care. Their shifts between active technical work and bursts of junior-style wrestling seemed reasonable. An aggressive whip into the ropes would start a brief running sequence, or a punishing whip into the corner would stun the opponent, leaving them unable to defend themselves long enough that charging the opponent wasn't too unreasonable. Regardless of what created the burst, these style changes were presented as simply another way to utilize the opponent's arm they already had control of. Their matches were a fluid collection of small and brief offensive maneuvers that provided a progression, continuing to gain momentum for the worker on the ascendancy until a successful movement from the defender turned the tide. Because the wrestler in the hold was always actually defending themselves by moving to alleviate pressure, it was reasonable that they were able to stay in the match, and often regain control. Once that movement stopped because they really got caught with a flash knockdown off a stealthy strike, it was reasonable enough that a submission from a joint manipulation could finally stick, or a knockout blow from a leap or a throw could occur. While the grappling itself was never dull, largely because of the constant activity, these bursts and cheap shots made the quote-unquote slower portions more interesting, because they had the audience anticipating the next outburst or affront that might leave someone helpless long enough that a submission would work, or a high-impact suplex or top rope dive wouldn't be avoided. For better and worse, their matches unexpectedly ended, maybe too early to be ideal, but reinforcing the idea that the audience, just as the combatants, always had to be on guard and ready for anything. Their first match that's available is a classic British technical style bout that took place on November 26, 1980 in Walthamstow. It's my favorite of the series because they put their heart and soul into doing a flowing and shifting start to finish match where everything was earned and worked for. What's so awesome about this match is it feels like a whole, rather than a disjointed assortment of cooperative action spots lamely connected after segments of rests. These are actual wrestling matches, where they put a serious amount of effort into utilizing joint locks and manipulations to the fullest of their abilities, rather than just holding the non-resistant opponent for a minute, then moving on to flat-footed striking and cooperative high spots. They credibly built up everything off the technical base, which actually allowed them to explore quite a bit of other ground in a more believable manner by eventually catching the opponent in a position where their defenses were down, rather than just striking, running, or jumping at an opponent that was conveniently standing there waiting to be hit. This was a great example of what makes the British wrestling of this era so much more artistic and credible than what passes for today's stop-and-start wrestling. The matches feel like one long sequence because the action continues through reversals and counters until an escape forces them to quickly and credibly re-establish control through a new explosion to gain the advantage. There aren't really rest holds in good World of Sport because there's useful work in and out of the holds, and they don't really stay still for any length of time. As with a real fight, this technical style was primarily about moving and doing all the necessary work to maintain the advantage, rather than constantly pausing for some nonsense, then forcing a certain hold or point of attack because a one-note story is supposed to be logical and psychologically sound. World of Sport stylists operated under the same premise every grappling sport has, that control and positioning lead to victory, as through them you can eventually win with literally anything, whether or not you attacked that area before. They told a series of short stories that were organically set up based upon what was available, trying to present several options rather than telegraphing what would likely lead to or play into the finish. In a sense, these old matches have a ton of misdirection because they don't just announce what they are about through endless theatrical selling and contrived focus. That's not to say the matches are random, but rather that there are more points of focus with less duration. A key sequence of linked events will probably occur at some point when the opponent's defense breaks down or the aggressor takes a cheap shot to make something happen. But even the matches that have injury storylines understand a finish doesn't require a certain area to be weakened, and put more effort towards momentarily breaking down the opponent's defenses so their point of no return can somehow be reached. These matches feel more reactionary than what we get today, less scripted and choreographed, and more based upon creating a position while an actual defensive effort is being put forth. They are complete, proper start-to-finish wrestling battles with urgent and continual offensive and defensive movement to avoid getting hurt, rather than hokey theatrical performances where they showcase the quote-unquote highlights of a cooperative exhibition in between a bunch of overdramatic spasming and supposedly suspenseful lying around. The matches feel more complete and satisfying because there's 100% effort towards everything, making the small portion where that effort is put towards a specific storyline stand out more. In the end, though, there's no real story aside from doing the only thing that actually matters, trying to win. The early portion of Dynamite vs. Rocco focused on arm locks in order to feature an entertaining array of gymnastic counters and tumbling. They showed the lost art of escaping in steps, with Dynamite having to roll to his back, kip up, cartwheel, duck under, back body drop, and turn into his own wrist lock to counter Rocco's wrist lock. Though the match was detrimentally short, it felt the fullest of their matches because they saw each technical wrestling sequence through from start to finish, without losing focus on the importance of every step in the chain. This felt like such an amazing technical match, but in reality, it followed the traditional British format of starting technical and then heating up as the wrestlers became less honorable and began working in cheap shots, so it was actually only the first round that was predominantly technical wrestling. Everything in this match just seemed connected and working in unison. For instance, Rocco gained the advantage in the opening lockup of round 2 with a body lock, then moved into a wrist lock, but Dynamite forward rolled to alleviate the pressure and fired back with a huge elbow. The explosive stiff elbow was, of course, the point of the sequence, but the way they incorporated it had so much more art, believability, and surprise to it. Today, they would just stand in front of each other with Rocco simply waiting to be hammered, and then he would eventually get around to firing back, wash, rinse, and repeat. The second round was a lot more about whatever cheap shots they could incorporate out of the technical base they started the segments with. When your goal is to beat the opponent through any means necessary, technical wrestling still works because twisting and turning someone eventually puts them into a position where they are no longer able to avoid a big strike, or perhaps even a suplex. In this setting, the cravat could just as easily lead to a chin lock, an elbow drop, or a brief segment of control setting up a stomp to the face. No matter what, the technical wrestling was so completely interwoven with whatever high spot the sequence was setting up that the high spot didn't kill the illusion. Safe stand-ups weren't enforced, so taking the opponent down any way you could was a great strategy, because even if they had answers to your locks, you could always just lower the boom when they were getting back up. Rocco was winning the technical battles in round 1 by gaining the first advantage out of the lockup. Dynamite tried to speed things up in round 2 and do a more junior-style match, but Rocco escaped to the floor and caught him with a kick to the stomach when he was re-entering. While they presented a technical contest within the realistic realm of a sporting event, increasingly everything they were doing was really about riling each other and the fans up. As the action grew more and more heated, the ref handed out his public warnings, but increasingly struggled to retain control. Dynamite kept ratcheting up the pace and intensity, while Rocco worked in cheap shots to slow him down. Rocco did his damage in round 2 by capitalizing on positioning, and while he didn't land a knockout blow, he set his path to victory in motion. Late in round 2, Rocco busted Dynamite open out of the headlock with a punch around the eye, further opening the cut through a kick, headbutt, elbow, and just digging into the wound. Rocco had more control time in the first 2 rounds, but Dynamite made memorable, brief, explosive comebacks. Dynamite was clear to start the 3rd round, but seemed to be running out of time due to the blood loss. Kid was able to make something happen quickly, landing on his feet to counter Rocco's second backbreaker and using one of his own, a falling headbutt and a released German suplex to score the first fall at 1 minute 22 seconds of round 3. The second half was quite fast-paced, intense, and heated. They really built this up well, unfortunately to an abrupt ref stoppage that stole the victory from a game Dynamite Kid right after he scored the first fall. Being on the short side didn't help the match because they fill all the time they have, and the finish was very anticlimactic because we anticipated a restart after the fall that never came. It was a way for Dynamite to look good by scoring the only fall, and to look tough by wanting to fight through his injury, while Rocco, the star who was actually staying around, got an important win over the guy who was becoming the top export. Everything in the match served a purpose. The only downsides were that they definitely could have gone longer at the same pace and quality, and it built to a rematch they couldn't deliver for another year. Everything they did was so well done and entertaining though. They used a lot of simple head, wrist, and arm locks that would be obvious rest holds you might be fast forwarding through in an American context, but they were never stagnant, and all of it was meaningful and actually active. This match really flew by. I give it 4.5 stars out of 5. Their second match that we have footage of took place on November 18th, 1981 at Queen Elizabeth Hall in Oldham. It's quite different, a fast-paced grudge match that's more about explosive brawling and general nastiness. This was their most aggressive and mean-spirited bout, with both quickly becoming quite chippy and just beating each other up at every opportunity. Scrawny little Dynamite was bullied during school, and once he learned to defend himself, he was always going to stand up for himself against obnoxious ruffians who tried to torment him. Dynamite was almost as much of a heel here as Rocco, certainly as much of a punk. This felt more similar to a great version of the American brawling style, rather than the classic British grappling we saw the year before, focusing more on punching, and less on how to actually work any of it in. It was incredibly heated, urgent, and intense though. The primary difference here was that instead of setting up the cheap shot with the cravat, they were much more likely to start with a body slam and kick the opponent when he's down, or punch him when he was getting back up. The skill level was the lowest of their 3 matches, but they were exchanging being technical for being angry. It wasn't as eloquent in artwork, but was arguably more effective of a fight. While not as technically evolved or gymnastic oriented as Dynamite's New Japan work from this period, everything was done with ill intent. In the end, it's actually more of a modern international style match, an aggressive technical brawl, with fiery action and some flying moves reasonably worked in. It's a really strong rivalry match, setting up the rematch. These two made you believe they wanted to hurt one another. Everything was just mean and nasty. Though this match was less flashy, they made every simple move look deadly. You've never seen a whip into the corner like the one Dynamite Kid did. Normally just a means to an end, setting the opponent up to charge at them, they made the corner bump look harder and more damaging than practically any move you'd see in an American match of this period. Again, their similarities helped make the match so good because they were at home doing an aggressive style where the goal was predominantly to inflict punishment, and both are big bumpers who make the opponent's moves look much better. Rocco slapped Kid before the bell, and it was on, with Rocco aiming to take as many cheap shots as he could from the outset, which brought out an even more fiery version of Kid. Without losing the grudge match feel, they were able to work their way into the technical wrestling and deliver junior-style action with offense and pace very much ahead of their time, at least outside of what Dynamite was doing with Tiger Mask in Japan. Rocco, being the heel that was utilizing some dubious tactics, set Dynamite up for his explosive, impassioned comebacks. Still, the stylistic shift here away from the consistent technical struggle led to their two 1981 matches breaking to run and strike, rather than these aspects occurring more naturally within the flow. They definitely beat each other up in an exciting manner, but the match felt less believable and more disjointed because they spent more time standing in front of each other and less time truly defending themselves. Dynamite was supposed to be the babyface, but he got the first public warning, and generally wasn't much less of a dick than Rocco. Dynamite did some stuff that would normally be kind of lame, such as smashing the opponent's head into the canvas, but he did it in such a vicious manner that it actually felt like a high spot. Meanwhile, Rocco dug his thumb into Dynamite's eye just to be sadistic. Rather than do the traditional slingshot suplex, Rocco did a lot more damage to the midsection just dropping Dynamite on the top rope. Then he picked him up and did a traditional vertical suplex for the first fall 2 minutes into round 2. Dynamite evened things up at 1:30 into round 3, based on one of the most brutal diving knee drops you'll ever see. While it earned Kid another public warning for attacking a downed opponent, it really felt like the coup de grace for Rocco, even though this bizarrely didn't even score Dynamite his first pin. While most flying moves are little more than fun fluff, this was really something else because their matches had been built around taking advantage during the moments the opponent was defenseless. With Dynamite in mid-flight, you felt like the helpless Rocco was so vulnerable his head was going to be squashed like a grape from the impact. They definitely didn't need Rocco's wobbly attempt at a backbreaker comeback being thwarted by Dynamite landing on his feet and dropping Rocco on his head again with a big backdrop to finish this fall. Rocco's mouth was busted open hard way, and Dynamite would have been okay with avenging Rocco's ref stop victory due to a cut in their previous match. He was on Rocco as soon as this intermission ended, battering him with more headbutts and headrams that didn't do wonders for Rocco's wound. This took a more realistic trajectory, as once Rocco was hurt, Dynamite never let him off the hook, resulting in an easy second fall since Rocco never had the opportunity to recover from the first fall. A tombstone piledriver and the signature diving headbutt should have been enough, but again, Dynamite randomly followed with an unnecessary suplex to finish things off at 1:20 of round 4. Despite some excess, this was their best and only decisive finish. The match felt much longer and more complete than the 9 minutes 50 seconds the 4 rounds actually added up to, partially because the breaks between rounds make it easier for them to go all out during the rounds, but mostly because everything was so well done it seemed like more happened than perhaps actually did. This predictably earned Dynamite the title shot less than 2 weeks later, before he went back to Japan. This wasn't exactly the style people think of when you talk about a World of Sport match, as it barely had any mat work. They tried not to sacrifice realism for flash, mostly allowing things to evolve out of the fight, rendering the opponent prone, hurting the opponent enough with their blows that they could pounce on them when they were down. Stylistically, this was the least interesting of their 3 matches, but it was really effective, and once again very much ahead of its time, this time in a different style, the hard-hitting grudge match. The result wasn't a surprise because Dynamite had to win to earn the title shot, but they figured out how to make the finishing segment memorable, if more for the general brutality than the actual finishing hold. We don't normally see this much brawling from Dynamite, but the match still contained the aspects that would become signatures of its style, as it was fast and snappy with a lot of aggressive bursts. I give this match 4.25 stars. Their final match that we have footage of took place less than 2 weeks later on November 30th, 1981, for Rocco's World Heavy Middleweight title. This match kind of combined the first two, trying harder to reincorporate the technical aspects we saw in their first match with an increased focus on gymnastics, while amping up the aggressive rivalry aspects that made their second match work. It's very explosive and higher impact, but it didn't feel as unified and cohesive because they were now trying to make the best aspects of 2 very different stylistic matches work together, in one match that, at 12:50, was hardly any longer. The mentality here was to escape into a high spot, rather than stay with the technical base and really be disciplined about when they found the opening to catch the opponent with something big. The 3-minute rounds naturally lent themselves more to bursts, whereas the 5-minute rounds of their first 2 encounters aided the more consistent development. While not as successful as a grudge match because they were trying harder early on to behave, perhaps because the title was on the line, it was their stiffest and nastiest match. Though not as urgent as their other matches, Dynamite more or less pulled out all the stops trying to win the title. Dynamite did resist the urge to drop a knee after the first round bell, avoiding a public warning, but for the most part he seemed to be extracting revenge for Rocco's past sins, particularly with a brutal knee drop to Rocco's nose. The early portion was much more technical than what we saw a few weeks earlier. Dynamite was made for this British style that was based upon the explosive first movement, and arguably did more than anyone to broaden the scope of that initial burst from the purely technical realm to include suplexes with his famous snap suplex and running sequence with his springier and more elastic whips into the ropes and corner. Gymnastics had long been established as a primary means of defense in this style, where they didn't just stand around paralyzed by any random no body control lock, and thus could more easily be utilized as a means of regaining the offensive. This was definitely a more proactive and less patient match than their first. They began heating up the grudge match aspect in the second round, with Kid slapping Rocco on the break, which led to Rocco slapping Dynamite out of the lockup, then kicking him in the face when he was down. Dynamite dropped a knee on Rocco's nose after a snapmare, and a pissed off Rocco kicked Dynamite while the ref was scolding Dynamite for having taken too long to follow up. Rocco was still recovering from the 24 stitches he suffered against his great rival Marty Jones earlier in the month, and he re-injured the knee by missing a jumping knee in the corner in the third. Dynamite was once again warned for being too late following up with its stomp to the knee, but they didn't really go too far with this knee work, as the action was never stagnant enough for either to have their choice of attacks. The junior stuff worked well here because the arm drag flows as easily out of the running position as it does out of the lockup, and the rules stating you have to immediately follow up on a downed opponent or let them back up keep risky elbow and knee drops from feeling too out of place. This match had more rope running, but less activity when they were on the ground. They purposely slowed things down as it progressed, with Dynamite responding slower in the fourth after Rocco ended the third with a sleeper that garnered him his first public warning for not breaking at the bell. Rocco was now willing to try the reverse diving elbow after his body slam because Dynamite was more groggy than when he hit the standard elbow drop, but this backfired on him. For the most part, this was a more honorable bout, with a lot of quick technical action. They mixed it up here and there, but were more interested in better flow than more heat and intensity. The action was super smooth, though there was still a sense of resistance and struggle, without anything coming too easy or anyone being down for too long. Even if this wasn't their most active bout, there was tons more movement than you would normally see in 1981. There were more fake moves, but they made a genuine effort to make sure these high spots were logically set up and worked in out of the position they were already in at the time. Their spectacular moves didn't feel like just showing off. While this match was more well-rounded than the other two, it didn't excel at one particular thing like those two did. The match wasn't about any particular hold or working to the finish. It was about staying in the current moment, stretching and tossing the opponent as much as they could without getting ahead of themselves. The last round was all action, but you didn't know that it was about to end. There wasn't the sense of, hey, we're doing the finishing sequence. Unfortunately, the finishing sequence was just a means of avoiding either taking a loss, as neither man could continue after crashing to the concrete when Dynamite suplexed Rocco over the top. This kept the title on Rocco, sending Dynamite back to Japan and Calgary without having to put him over. Given they were doing a more explosive match, the finish kind of worked within the big letting loose at any opportunity style they'd been working throughout the series. As with everything else, Dynamite seized an opportunity that just evolved from the position they were in. It just didn't work out for him as well as he hoped. The match, and even the finish, felt spontaneous and reactionary. They didn't try to make one spot more important, opting for more of a chess match where every move was important in the progression, and even though some pieces are less powerful, they are equally important towards the development because a chain of events is required to earn the victory. This was worked with a bit less verve than their previous matches, feeling like it was going a bit longer than it actually did. I give this match 4 stars. While the Dynamite Kid vs. Rollerball Rocco matches fell a tad beneath their amazing potential due to being on the short side and not having ideal finishes, these two top talents certainly went all out to make the absolute most out of what they had to work with. That was the kind of work ethic they brought regularly. Hulk Hogan, who had no interest in the art of wrestling and was only in the business for what he could take from it, may have forgotten his supposed good friend Mark Rocco just a few years after their New Japan heyday, when Hogan laughably claimed to be miraculously breaking the international time zones to the point he was working 400 days a year. Real wrestling fans will always be discovering the work of these two great legends, though, and once you've seen what Dynamite and Rollerball can do in the ring, their extraordinary work is unforgettable.